Welcome to Casino Guru News, live from SBC Summit 2024 in Lisbon. And we're here in our media zone bringing you exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the iGaming world today. And right now we're sitting down with Amanda Brewer, iGaming executive. Hi Amanda, how are you?
Hi, I'm really happy to be here today.
That's good. Welcome, I guess. Could you tell us, maybe for our viewers who don't know you that much, something about yourself, your line of work, what are your passions?
So I am a Canadian. I've been working in the online and land-based gaming industry for about 15 or so years, and I have, I guess, had my fingers in a lot of different things in terms of opening up Ontario's first regulated market, making sure that we were able to get single event sports betting legal across the country. And then I most recently spent 2 years as a country manager for Kindred Group and its Unibet brand as they were coming into the Ontario market. So I've kind of had a lot of different experience, you know, the operational side, the commercial side, the legislative side. So yeah, it's really, I'm thrilled to be here today to talk a little bit about what's going on in Canada.
Yeah, that's exciting. And we will get to that. I would just like to begin by prefacing that, as you said, we're meeting in a particularly interesting time, right? With 3 years in, and the Ontario iGaming market is as busy as it can get, with 50 operators running, licensed and locally running. Do you think that this number, 50 operators, is that sustainable number?
It's a great question, because Ontario and all of Canada was different from a lot of other jurisdictions. When our regulated market opened, it was already what they call a gray market. So there were already offshore operators in there. So it wasn't a matter of, you know, they kind of threw open a open for business sign on the front line and just invited everyone in. They really had to try and get as many of those unlicensed operators registered and compliant as possible. So it's a bit of a different challenge than what you see south of the border in the US, where there had been nothing in there, and then very slowly they're allowing operators to come in. So the 50, if you can think, maybe at some point in time there were 150 or 200 gray market operators. So having 50 in some respects is not a huge number. I think the number is going to fluctuate over the next couple of years. I don't think it's ever going to drop down to half of that, but I think because there are some very small operators, medium-sized operators, and we have very large, you know, the big operators like Bet365, FanDuel, BetMGM, DraftKings, like huge operators. So, you know, the hope for the Ontario market is you'll always have a little bit of each of those. You don't want it to just be a market that just, you know, the big five are in there and there's really nothing else.
There's no room
but I
for
think,
anyone.
you know, there'll always be operators coming and going. So I think the sweet spot for Ontario, if we were to come back in a couple of years, I think it's probably going to be somewhere between 40 and 50, but probably not too many more than that.
Yeah, I understand. That was actually my next question, was about your expectation of growth. Has Ontario reached its full potential? Would you say that 40, 50, that's where we want the number of operators to be?
I think it's a comfortable number. Ontario has a set of really good regulatory standards. They're risk-based. The operators are very comfortable with them. But there's also a lot of compliance that comes in Ontario. And, you know, there are a lot of costs to operating in Ontario as well. You're also not allowed to offer any inducements or bonuses, which is different than the US. And we have some potential advertising challenges coming down the pipeline as well. So really, in order to be a successful operator, to have really good market share in Ontario, you need some pretty deep budgets for marketing, and you need some pretty big staff to handle all the compliance requirements. That will be harder to achieve for the smaller operators. So I think what you'll probably see is sort of in that small to mid-tier level, coming in and going out, you know, some pulling out just because, you know, it's not a sustainable business model for them. Others really wanting to give it a go and seeing what they can do. So I think that's where you'll see the ebb and flow of the market over the next couple of years. But I do think in terms of the operators who've come in, they've invested, they've hired, you know, I think for them, they need to stay in Ontario for the long term. And that's where you're going to start to see the growth as well, is through those operators, you know, PointsBet as well, you know, Penn through the ScoreBet. They've all got offices and they're expanding. We now have colleges and universities who are developing training programs so that they can train students to come in and work in this industry. So I see that also as being part of the growth of the industry.
Yeah, that's very interesting. I guess we'll just have to wait and see.
That's it. Yeah, maybe back in a couple of years.
Yeah, exactly. Ontario isn't the only province, showing interest in iGaming business. I mean, Alberta is also very close to opening and launching its own market. How do you think that will impact Ontario?
I think the Alberta market is something that we've been waiting for with a lot of excitement. The Minister, Dale Nally, has traveled to ICE. He was at the Canadian Gaming Summit in Toronto in June. And he has certainly said a lot of the right things that will appeal to operators. So, a light touch regulation, really following closely to the Ontario standards. And I think that's going to be the interesting thing about Canada is despite it being a very large country, we have fewer provinces and territories than there are, the states.
Yeah.
So Ontario having, what we would call the first mover advantage, first province to go, first province to publish standards. Operators have been in the market, some of them for almost 3 years. They know the standards, they're comfortable with them, they like them. So it doesn't make a lot of sense as more provinces decide to follow to completely throw that out and rewrite a whole different set of standards. So the hope is, when Alberta does announce, because right now we don't have a launch date, any idea of the regulatory standards. We have conduct and manage in Canada, so we don't have any information on that yet. But the hope is that it will follow pretty closely to Ontario. That will allow the operators to come in and just hit the ground running because they're already compliant. They know what to expect. They know what they're doing. So it just makes it really easier. That being said, Alberta has to make it all work for Alberta. So the expectation isn't a copy and paste from Ontario, but you refer to the Ontario standards. You take what you think will work really well for your province, and whatever else you need to do, you make it work. So that's what we're just waiting to find out is sort of what they're going to do to make sure that standards and compliance work for Alberta. But, watch this space. The hope is as we get through the fall, there'll be more information coming out.
Do you think that Alberta will be able to accommodate as many operators as Ontario? Or just a wild guess.
Yeah, it's a great question because Alberta has the same issue Ontario had, which is they're already unlicensed operators in the province.
Exactly.
So again, a reasonable tax rate, reasonable regulation will encourage more of them to come in, become licensed and become compliant. That being said, Alberta has smaller population base than Ontario. So I think that if they decide to go the white label route, if they want to get their market up and running really quickly, they can say, like, if you are a licensed operator in Ontario and you're in good standing, then you can come into Alberta. So, you could presumably see 50 operators deciding to come in and, start paying tax in Alberta. Whether or not that is going to be a feasible business model for all of them, I don't know. And quite frankly, there's probably some operators that don't have a license in Ontario, but with Alberta opening, they're going to want to come in and get licensed. So it will be really, really interesting to see if that will happen. But quite feasibly, out of the total sum of operators in Ontario, you could see most of them, if not all of them, going to Alberta as well.
Speaking of expansion also, why do you think other provinces have been slower to consider and attempt to replicate Ontario's business? I mean, success in opening iGaming market.
Yeah, it's one of those things where if you have a monopoly, it's really hard to convince people that, they don't need a monopoly anymore. They need to share. And that's been the history of how gaming has worked in all of the Canadian provinces. There's been a monopoly mostly through the Lottery Corporation. Yeah. They've had, the lottery. They've now had sports books. They've launched online as well. So monopoly. So, you think back in the history of every monopoly that's existed and you've pretty much had to pry it out of their hands.
They're not ready to let it go.
Yeah. So the way that gaming will work for other provinces, it starts at the political level. So first and foremost, it has to be a government that comes in, whether it's an attorney general or a finance minister who says, you know what, we can't fight it anymore. We got to join them. British Columbia is going through an election in the next few weeks. And so we'll wait and see who comes out the victor on that side of the election. But I think the safe money would be probably on British Columbia being the third province to go. Then, Quebec at some point we hope would go as well. And after that, you've kind of knocked off the main provinces that operators would be interested in because of the population. Once you start getting into Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Atlantic provinces, the population numbers really drop. Not to say there wouldn't be interest, but they probably wouldn't be attracting as many operators just because of the smaller populations.
Yeah, understand. So there's a interest in expanding the industry across the country, and to kind of point this conversation to a different direction. There's been also interest in focusing on responsible gambling and responsible gambling tools, right? So would you say that Ontario has done a good job protecting and informing its players?
It's one of the key tenets when our government decided to finally license and regulate operators. They really wanted to make sure that player protections were available, because before, who knew what was going on?
Yeah, exactly.
Who knew what operators were doing? So the RG was first and foremost in our government's mind. And if you listen to any of the interviews with Minister Nally for Alberta, he's saying the same thing. It's really about RG. The revenue generation for the province is great, but that is not the key driver for any government doing this. So on the Ontario side, when the market first launched, operators were made aware that at some point in time, there would be a province-wide self-exclusion program. So currently, every operator has to offer a variety of RG tools, deposit limits, timeouts, self-exclusion. But customers would have to go to every single operator and self-exclude, which is really onerous. So just several weeks ago, iGaming Ontario announced that they had selected a vendor for self-exclusion. So hopefully, as we get through the fall and into early next year, there'll be lots more information coming out about how that province-wide system is going to work. So Alberta, again, if they can take advantage of anything that Ontario has done, Alberta will also have the same really rigorous RG standards, and hopefully the self-exclusion can carry into Alberta as well. So if you're a DraftKings customer in Ontario and you're going out to Edmonton for, some reason, and you want to play in Edmonton, that can all of it can carry forward. You're not going to have to redo things if you're a customer of an operator in Ontario when you go into Alberta. So all the safety nets, or your wallet or your game preferences will just kind of seamlessly move back and forth. That's the dream. Whether or not that's what happens right away, we'll have to wait and see.
Yeah. Similarly, there's been also an ongoing effort in regulating betting advertisements, right, in the country. What's your opinion on these efforts? Are they justified, or are they driven mostly by fears and could lead to potentially poor policies?
That's such a good question, and you probably heard my sigh, because it's like with any new industry, when a new industry launches, there's a whole rush to draw attention to brands, to acquire customers. You're all trying to get market share, and that's exactly what happened when our industry launched. It was brand new. People were still trying to figure out what they were going to do. Operators were trying to figure out what was going to work, and there were just a lot of people who didn't enjoy seeing the ads. The other challenge we had, again, because this is so brand new in Ontario and in Canada, we didn't have any data. So we were getting a lot of reporters that were writing stories on it, and they were using adjectives like a tsunami of advertising when it was completely the opposite. But we didn't have any data that was, local to Ontario that we could use to push back against these allegations. They were patently untrue, but, you get enough, fathers or parents who, start writing in about not being able to watch a hockey game without a sports betting ad and having to make sure their kids are out of the room. And it just generates a lot of negative headlines, and that's certainly not the case. So the good news is the Canadian Gaming Association just recently completed a study. So we now have advertising data. So we are now in a position where we're able to actually put facts into this discussion to prove that, in fact, after the industry opened and there was this spike in advertising, it's now dropping. which is what you'd expect because the market is starting to mature. It's starting to stabilize and level off.
Kind of slowing down.
But that didn't stop, some senators from trying to table some legislation that would force the federal government to just regulate it across Canada. Because the other challenge we have is when operators buy TV spots, the broadcasters give them a national rate card. So they're a licensed operator in Ontario, and you're seeing the ad in Ontario, but you're seeing it as a broadcast is beamed across the country. You're also seeing it in Vancouver and Edmonton and everywhere else. And that's what's making people upset too.
Yeah.
But that's, there are so many stakeholders that are involved in getting a sports betting ad on the air. And, it's the players and their agents and the leagues and the broadcasters and then the operators. And so it's a big ecosystem that has to come together to get sports betting ads on the air, but it's the industry that seems to be taking all the blame.
Yeah, understood. Could you make one bold prediction about the future of Canadian iGaming industry? I mean, not just about sports advertisement or whatnot, just how big could it get?
We've always said that we sort of punch above our weight in Canada because even before we regulated in Ontario, we had a lot of great companies that were providing all kinds of services, products and services globally. So I think that the spotlight is finally shining on Canada, and it's really great. But I think that we will see the other sort of three, Alberta, British Columbia, and Quebec, regulating in my lifetime. So we still have a long time for that, thankfully. But I think Canada will start to become one of those sort of shining lights in terms of really good regulation, really good operators. You're not seeing a lot of problems with, problem gambling or money laundering or all those things that operators work really hard to avoid. And the fact that Ontario was the first one, the hope is that you will see, best case scenario, a very similar set of regulations rolling out across Canada, which will make operators really happy. So in fact, Canada could become down the road like a textbook case for how to launch regulations. So that would be really nice.
Yeah, how to do it right.
How to do it right. Yeah, and if we can also have a whole bunch of, young people who graduate from colleges and universities with skills to work in this industry. So, it's technology based, it's entertainment based, it's, games based, or sports based. There's a lot to love about this industry. So I hope that as we get, further into it too, people realize it's safe, it's responsible, and it's a really great industry to work in.
Definitely, I can agree on that. Thank you for being here with us. Maybe just to add some personal touch, we're here at SBC Summit, right? What's your favorite moment of the summit so far?
You know what? It's running into people. It's so big. It's our first time, everyone's first time here because it's the first time in Lisbon. So you're trying to find your way around and you stand still and you turn around and there's like 3 people that you didn't know would be here. So it's the best thing about every conference is just the running into just people. Yeah.
That's a very good answer. Thank you, Amanda, again for sharing some incredible insights. It was great to have you here.
Thank you.
And I hope you all, including Amanda, keep following us for more exclusive interviews, and see you next time. Bye.